on to Procurement-AI is artificial intelligence in procurement real. I'm your host or moderator, John Hanson, and joining me today will be Bill Michaels and Joseph Yakura. Now, before we get to today's webinar, which I promise will be very fascinating and interactive, I'll get into the details shortly. A few tips for using WebEx. First of all, the audio is provided through your computer speakers only. If you have any trouble or have any difficulty with hearing, simply click on the phone icon above the chat window to receive the teleconference information. The chat box is going to be open for the entire session, and this is an important aspect of here because, again, when I mention interactive, we're going to be able to communicate with each other on a real-time basis. In other words, instead of waiting until the end for your questions, what we're going to do is we're going to prompt you to provide with your insights and your thoughts and any comments or queries you might have right through the event. This is an important dialogue, and you're part of this webinar as well. If you have any other technical problems, you can email at webcast@zycus.com. I want to, of course, introduce you to our guests who will be joining me on this panel. Bill Michaels, who is Vice President of Operations America at SIPS. Bill is the Vice President of Operations and Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, which I'd mentioned. Until then, he was the founder and CEO of Aeropart Consulting. And for more than 23 years, he was at ADR North America, which is his own organization. Bill, welcome. How are you today?
Hey, great, and I'm really happy to be here. This is a great topic to learn about and understand.
Well, it's one of those things, and we're sort of talking about it in the virtual green room, I guess I'd call it that, is that, you know, there's so much of it lumped together that it becomes very, very difficult to discern what actually is artificial intelligence, right?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think it's going to fundamentally change procurement and the way that procurement works and purchasing works over the next 5 to 7 years. We'll see some big changes.
I know, and that's hopefully what we'll cover today, because what we want to be able to do is equip people to be able to understand procurement professionals as to not only what it is, but how they can harness that power, and certainly we're going to get into the areas of what they need to be doing on a practical level. Now, I want to also introduce Joseph Yakura. Now, Joe is going to be joining us any time, I would imagine, Bill, and we'll keep our informed. He's not having any technical difficulties coming in, but he was with organizations such as Fannie Mae, where he's Vice President, Chief Procurement Officer, and Bank of America. And you know Joe very well, don't you, Bill?
And Joe's been around a long time. He was chairman of CAPS, the research group associated with ISM, and he's been with American Express. So Joe's been in the space for a while.
When he arrives, we're going to certainly introduce him into the conversation overall. And, of course, for those who haven't attended one of the webinars before, although I'm sure all of you have, one or the other, I'm John Hanson. I'm the editor and lead writer for Procurement Insights. I also have my radio show on the Blog Talk Radio Network, which airs out of New York City. I aired more than 800 episodes focused on business and, in particular, supply chain and procurement. So, you know, that's who I am. And enough about me. Let's move on to one other little piece of work we want to do, of course, is pausing for the cause, and Zycus, who is the kind sponsor of this webinar. This talks about their comprehensive source to pay suite. One thing I'd like to point out is that they're the only 3 leaders in Gartner's 2017 MQ for Strategic Sourcing Application Suite. So I would encourage you to check them out in further details. Also want to remind you, when we sign off at the other end of this hour, a screen will pop up which will give you some additional information. I would encourage you to avail yourself of that information and insight. Now, one more thing, what's coming up, where procurement intellect meets digital technology. Ziko Horizon 2018 is just around the corner. I mean, we're coming into June already. October will be here in no time at all, and it's at the luxurious Lansdowne Resort and Spa in Leesburg, Virginia. It's a great conference because you get a chance to interact and learn. Procurement and finance experts, people from Gartner and Forrester, the Hackett Group, Span Matters. I mean, it goes on and on. It's one of those dynamic events or conferences where you walk away enriched not just by the connections that you make, but by the insights and information you gain. We encourage you to register now, and I want to remind everyone that if you use promo code WEBINAR100, you will receive a $100 or discount off the actual conference post. So you know what? And again, we're still waiting for Joe to join us, so I'll make one more point. Tweet chat. We have a hashtag called AIPro2018. Now, what will happen throughout this webinar, and I promised that I would get to this a few minutes ago, this is very much going to be an interactive experience. What that means is, besides being able to communicate with myself and the panelists throughout this discussion, there are going to be a series of polls, free and all, live polls, where you'll be able to provide your input or feedback on the issues that we're going to be talking about, the areas of focus. So what's happened is that once these polls are closed and we get the results, shortly after this webinar, we'll be posting results on Twitter. And what this does with this hashtag is enables people who weren't able to attend and those who would want to be part of the discussion. And one of the things I found with this bill that's really great is the fact that it goes on the discussion a week or two afterwards. So mark down this hashtag because, again, we're going to take the conversation about AI and procurement beyond the webinar itself. All right, so now let's get to the first question and the areas of agenda. We're going to focus on understanding AI, focus harnessing artificial intelligence, and ultimately capitalizing on it. And the first step in terms of understanding what is artificial intelligence, I'll start with this initial poll, and I'll cue the polling people. To what degree will artificial intelligence, AI, affect your job as a procurement professional? Will it significantly, moderately, minimally, and not sure? Now, there's no right or wrong answer. We just want your opinion on it. And, Bill, not to influence anyone's response, but what do you think they're going to say?
Well, I think they may say moderately, but I would say something different. And we can chat later. We'll see what people really have to say about artificial intelligence. Right now, it's not a factor, but it potentially can be.
Now, kind of interesting when you talk about artificial intelligence as a factor, and again, we don't want to, and the poll has been started. When we talk about it as being a factor, I mean, it's everywhere. Digital transformation. I mean, one of the things that when I did the recent interview with Microsoft's new president, Kevin Peasker, and wrote a paper about digital transformation and cultural impact, McKinsey came out with a study that said that while everyone's saying organizations, and in particular organizational leadership, has to take the initiative and a proactive approach to what they call digital reinvention. The McKinsey study found out that out of 1,620 incumbent companies, Bill, only 20% actually had a digital strategy. And out of that group, only 2% actually had a supply chain strategy. I mean, does that sort of allude to what you were saying earlier? It can but may not necessarily have a significant impact?
I don't, John. I really do. I think that can be a factor.
So now let's see what the polling, I think, is closed now, so we'll wait for the results. So a lot of it really begins at the top, isn't it?
Yes, it sure does. And actually, it starts when you're starting to plan and manage procurement and you're building strategic plans. You really have to start thinking about how you're going to use technology in the future.
Now, again, let's ask this question because it's kind of interesting. If we look at this in terms of technology use, I mean, technology is nothing new to the world and the business world as well. What do you think some of the differences are now? I mean, how is this different than, let's say, other technological breakthroughs that have happened in the past? Bill?
Yeah, I'm having a little bit of difficulty. Can you go through that?
Okay. How do you think this digital transformation in artificial intelligence, how do you think it's different from the technology in the past, the breakthroughs that occurred previously? I mean, because technology has been a big part of this, from the desktop to the ERPs to the cloud. How is this, do you think, much different?
Well, it's much different because we're talking about machine learning now. So the machine learns. So, for instance, one example of how this could be used, and this really bothers some people, is it could potentially find all of the suppliers across the internet. It can potentially do an RFI. It can potentially learn from doing RFIs in the past, sort out the RFI, move it to an RFP, and make a recommendation to a sourcing professional. So every time it transacts with either people or information, it learns. So that, I think, is going to make a little bit of a difference because we haven't had a technology like that in the past.
Well, you know what? I don't want to get off track here, but Joe is actually trying to call in, and he's looking for another number. So give me just a quick moment to provide that. So the real difference to what you're saying is that the machines are learning. In other words, it's not just a functional of a microchip and a processor that's driven by manual input. There's actually something that goes beyond that initial interaction between man and machine. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And lots of applications that are going to be useful in driving learning. So I recently heard, I was in Silicon Valley yesterday, and I heard of one group building a personal assistant that actually can call and make appointments for you, speak in multiple languages, and interact with your potential customers, associates. So that's coming our way. I don't think it's yet, but I think you'll see it.
Now, so is that part of the thing, though, is that it's a coming attraction type of scenario where people haven't been able to really wrap their hands around or minds around what exactly this means?
I think people are working on the technology to make it work, and there's a lot of effort being put into how can you use this technology. I mean, I find it very interesting that I can be searching for something on the internet, and the next day across my social media, all the companies that are selling that thing are giving it to me. So something sorting through, looking at it, understanding that I'm looking for that, and then distributing the information back to manufacturers to let them know that I'm looking. And that I find that amazing, because I only look for one thing, and then all of a sudden I get a bunch of social media responses about, hey, look at this one, this one's great, look at these features, and it surprises me. But that's the learning, that's machine learning, and there's an early example of how it's looking through and pawing through data and summarizing that data and then getting it back out to manufacturers so they can connect with me.
All right, now we're still waiting for the results to come up. So, our Zycus, any idea when the results will be available? Please let us know. And as soon as they are, I'll be sure to share them with everybody. Oh, here they are. They're up. No, sir, that I said that. So, any surprises here, Bill? Significantly, 25%. 50% moderately, and 17% said minimally. Any surprises?
Yeah, that's a surprise to me, because as you start to see the transactional side of our supply chains and purchasing, I predict out about 5-7 years you won't see it, especially when you're thinking about the whole planning function. If you have integrated supply chains and you're connected across your supply chain, then when you get a demand, it's going to go right on. So forecasts will go away. You won't need planners because you'll have perfect information real time all the time. So I think it's going to be a lot more significant than people may imagine at this point.
Well, ultimately, so what do these numbers reflect to you? Significantly, moderately, minimally? What would you say to the people who said, okay, significantly, or the ones who said moderately? Are they on the right track to this? The ones who said minimally, what would be their reasons for saying that, do you think?
They may be aware of what the technology will be doing. They may not be aware of how that technology is currently being architected and built, and some of those things are being built as we speak. So I think they may not have thought through all the implications of what a learning machine might do and how it might impact us. I do see the changing over time, where I think we'll have a real focus on driving value, integrating suppliers and supplier relationship management, and really focus on driving the chain. I don't think we'll be pushing purchase orders out the door. I think that will be done by machines.
So let me turn to you in the audience there, and of course your response, and there is no right or wrong answer in this. Anyone out there, tell us why you chose what you did. For example, someone who said, it wouldn't have or it'll have a minimal impact. Why did you say that? Share that information with us. In the meantime, what we'll do is we'll progress through, and again, I'm hoping that Joe will figure out what the technical difficulties are signing in. But let's continue. What is AI? It's ubiquitous. It talks about what to buy next online. I guess we associate it with that. Amazon's Alexa or Apple's Siri, detect credit card fraud. I mean, that's in the most basic sense, isn't it? This is from a ZDNet article, very recent one. I mean, that's just the basic elements of AI, isn't it, Bill?
I think yes. I mean, I said there's a lot of technology being put into AI. How can we use it? How can we really get some help. I think the personal assistant piece was really intriguing yesterday when it can call, make appointments for you, interact with your potential clients or even your suppliers, and it can speak in multiple languages, set up an appointment. That's where we're going. I mean, in my lifetime, the changes I've seen are incredible. I've seen the change to driverless cars. I can speak on my watch as a phone without even having my phone near me. It's some amazing changes, and I think we're just really beginning or genesis of what's to come. And some people are warning that what's to come might even be dangerous. So we'll take a look and see.
Well, this sort of touches on what you're saying: planning, learning, reasoning, problem solving. All of these elements are part of it. But here's something that I found was very interesting as we looked at this. They said that AI falls into two categories. And again, before my research on this, I didn't know there was such a thing as narrow AI and general AI. I mean, did you, Bill?
No, not.
And so, and I'm sure many of our people listening in, narrow AI is what they refer to as intelligent systems that have been taught or learned how to carry out specific tasks. And I immediately thought of RPA, or robotic process automation. Here, where there's functional tasks, and we covered this once about a month and a half ago in an article I wrote, where it was basically it's training it to do a specific or tedious function over and over again. But it's not really AI, is it? I mean, robotic process automation, is it?
Well, no, it isn't. But when I saw this, and I think about the that IBM runs for Watson, where it tells this guy shows up at the lobby and he's got all the tools and everything he needs to fix an elevator, and the elevator has communicated back with Watson and that it's got some potential maintenance needs. So I think that's kind of an example of what happens here.
Oh, so we've got this basic function, and do you think it's safe to say that the majority of people equate AI with this narrow definition?
Yeah, I think they're not sure. I'm not sure that it's narrow, but maybe you can explain a little bit more about.
Oh, here's a couple of areas that he talked about. For example, organizing personal and business calendars. I think you touched on this, Bill.
Yep.
Simple customer service queries. Intelligent system carry out booking a hotel, for example. Radiologists in terms of spotting tumors on X-rays. I mean, it seems like there's some defined, but it's very narrowly defined functions. What this can do. So when I look at narrow AI, I look at it saying it's got a specific task and does that task and only that task. And and I think that's really the key that I would look at with narrow, where artificial intelligence or general ID is very different, because they're talking about the capability of learning. In other words, adaptable intellect found in humans, which I found interesting. So one's almost like, I guess it would be able to say is, it is a degree robotic, because it executes a function that once it's done on narrow, they keep doing it. Whereas with the general AI, there's actually an element that extends beyond a particular task. And so if you look at this, and I find this interesting, they talk about haircutting, building spreadsheets, and other accumulated experiences, and they make references, ironically, to a movie such as Hell 2001, in what is that, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and Skynet and the Terminator, which doesn't exist today. But, is that possible that can become a reality? I mean, what's the gap between, I'd say we're closer to narrow now than we are to this general, or what they're referring to, let's call it the Skynet factor. What do you think?
I think you're right. I think, as we start to think about what might happen in the general AI, where you're using it in medical procedures and aerospace and some other areas, that's a lot of development, work time by people get it to learn and do what they want it to do. I think it's a lot easier for the which is, really specific task driven. And if we think about how does it relate to procurement, well, certainly, searching the internet for cash suppliers or building RFIs, those things are very, very narrow, and it can be taught by category which things to look for. So bringing it back in terms of general, I'm not sure where the application is when we start to think about procurement and supply chain.
Well, in terms of this, I'm going to pose this question out to the listening audience as well. When you think of this general AI and machine or learning capabilities, in there. Do you see that affecting or having an impact in any area of your life right now? You know, it's kind of interesting. When I asked that first poll question, I sort of did in the context of AI, not differentiating between narrow and general. But looking at both of these things, it'd be interesting to see, Bill, which areas the users would feel that response applies. So if we said and divided it up and said, okay, in a narrow sense, what the impact will be in a general sense, that would give us a gap between what we are or where we are today with it and where we're headed, wouldn't it?
Oh, sure would. I do believe it. And we're at the very, very beginning, the genesis, but when we start thinking about, Whippy in 3 to 5 years and how will it be used, certainly there are a lot of commercial uses for that I can see.
Absolutely. Now, you see, this sort of leads into our second section, which is harnessing the power. So in terms of that, I think that gives a pretty good overview, generalized overview, which is what we wanted to do with this, as to what AI does and what it does and what it entails. But let's look at harnessing AI, and starting with our next poll, and I'll cue the pollsters. In which area of procurement will artificial intelligence, AI, have the greatest impact? Spend analysis, strategic sourcing, risk management, workforce size, or other. And we talked about workforce size here in the green room, Bill.
Yes, we did.
So, thoughts on that?
When I start thinking about that, I start thinking about what things do we do that are really laborious, and how can we use technology to help us? And I start thinking about market analysis, and I start thinking about how do I build a strategic sourcing plan or a category plan. I think that those are areas where certainly we have to do a lot of research and a lot of effort. Cost analysis is another component where if we have a machine that could collect data on certain cost aspects, and we could use it to help us in those things. I think if we look at these in a sense, they're probably, and we certainly can help in all things. But I start to think about how can it help me build a strategic sourcing plan? How can it help me get the cost analysis of a component or service? And how can it show me the comparisons? How can it analyze the markets and tell me what's the demand and supply, and how's it going to impact the commodity that I might be buying if I'm buying a commodity? So I think of all those things, John.
Well, it's interesting, and David posted a question or a comment. He said, I want a system that will learn and update lead times and will adapt. This is interesting. My suppliers, will adapt my supply chain strategies on forecasted need versus adjusted lead times from vendors. Key point is to do more with less. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say if I were thinking about how that might work in artificial intelligence, it would probably be looking at what's the pattern. Is the lead time increasing or decreasing? What's the supplier capacity? What's the industry capacity for whatever the category is? And it can it would probably pull out the supplier and say, what's the lead time now? It can actually put notices out to you to let you know that this supplier's lead time is changing, either increasing or decreasing. So I think there's a lot of ways that AI can help with during lead time, but it certainly could keep the lead time updated. When it sees that change, it can go to the supplier and say, what's the lead time now? Why is the lead time increasing or decreasing?
So it's a matter of being able to, and this is moving again from that robotic process automation, the functional element or the narrow function of AI, to the general or the intelligent one. What we're really looking here, and what David is talking about, is the general, of where there's a smart ability to not only anticipate or perform a function, but to actually read into what that means and be able to respond to it automatically. Correct?
That's correct. What I think about is, we've always looked at big data, and I never could see, where are we going to be able to go through the big data and find the pieces of data we want. I think that changes when we add artificial intelligence, and that the big data is a lot easier to sort through when we have a machine that can sort through it. It never gets tired. It's always monitoring the marketplace. So there's positive and negative impacts of artificial intelligence too. I mean, I'm looking at these price bots, John. I know that sometimes when I'm in a chat with a bot, and I also know that I've got a price bot monitoring. If I go to the airline, they can change simultaneously. They've got bots looking at each other's website all the time, and they can read changes, and so we're in a world where those artificial intelligent bots are there, and the bots are there doing all this work already. So they're monitoring prices. We're in a world with dynamic pricing. All kinds of things are happening.
Well, now this is an interesting thing. For me, the big surprise in the poll result is workforce size, where the impact is going to be 10% or nominal. This goes back to what we had talked about before, because generally, isn't there a concern with automation? And I'm going back through the years that with greater automation, it'll require less people, and certainly referring to that interview I did previously with the Microsoft president, where he said, you can't do a checkbox anymore. You need people who are specialized, and that ties into that famous Uber quote: "Is building for the way in which the world should work, and not the way it does." And right. Freeing people up to become more strategic. I mean, I thought there would have been more focus or emphasis on the workforce size. I mean, does that surprise you a little bit?
It does. What I think is going to happen, and what did happen, what we've seen so far in my lifetime is it did eliminate some positions. It changed some positions, but let's look at when I started, and I am a little. So yeah, we had a secretary that did all our typing and managed all our spreadsheets, all that stuff. And when the piece evolved, we wound up doing it ourselves. Aren't very many of those people supporting departments now as they used to be. So I do see it as a change. And as we look at artificial intelligence, the biggest change is the transactions go away. And so what are the sourcing people and the planning people going to be then? So that's an interesting thing. I just got a note from Joe saying he's muted. He's he can hear us, but we can't hear him. So
well, you know what I think, and if I could, technical support. We're going to call in technical support of the webinar. It could be, and I'm noticing on the screen that Joe's probably joined us as a participant or in the audience, and I see that there's an attendee that is on the list whose phone is available. So we could have that kind of difficulty happening. Joe, if you hear us, we're going to try to get you on because we know you have something great to add to this. I'll just leave it in the capable hands of the webinar support people to get that going there. We'll see if we can get Joe on. Let's go one more thing in terms of this. Now, spend analytics, that's not surprising, and risk management. Are those natural areas for artificial intelligence? Like, how can artificial intelligence help risk management, Bill?
Well, some companies now that have geopolitical risk systems. So if there's an occurrence or a riot or a disturbance or an earthquake, I know Tom Knowles spoke about this one at John Deere. He gets a email or a text in the middle of the night that says you need to move inventory out of a hurricane zone. Looks like the hurricane's going to hit this plant. So I know that the automotive industry has that, and aerospace has some of that. So I think that can happen pretty quick. I think that those systems exist today. So that's one area that it may impact. The other area is the predictive models with suppliers. So, what's the probability that you're going to have an issue with the supplier monitoring finance and monitoring earthquakes and floods and monitoring so I think that those geopolitical systems will just improve.
Okay, so there's that, and again, we've already sort of touched a little bit on the spend analytics side of it. So again, some interesting results in the poll. Now, as we looked at harnessing this, and this goes back to the basics, and Gartner talked about preparing for the impact on AI and procurement. They talked about spend analytics and contract analytics being a key part of it because it's already used to do that. So I guess the spend analytics results shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, and why people said it. In artificial intelligence in procurement, and by the way, everyone on the PowerPoints when you download or have access to the on-demand. You'll hopefully have access to these resources that you can click through and read in depth as you can and at your discretion. But Edmund Zagorin talked about cognizant systems, replacing supply chain assistance, replacing purchase order systems, supplier onboarding workflows. It can forecast prices, generate contracts, and evaluating suppliers. I mean, does this seem within the realms of where we're headed right now, Bill?
I think it does. I think some people, I know Joe is working on a system like that. So Joe is well into the development of a procurement system that can actually do some of those things that you're talking about.
Oh, so again, is this sort of like something that's around the corner, so to speak, that we're looking at, or is this really within the imminent future?
It's within the imminent future. It's kind of like driverless cars. You see that, and I think maybe 5 or 8 years ago that was something that was almost unheard of, that you would have a driverless car.
Now, I asked, right, because and this goes back to replacing people and people becoming more strategic. I mean, that's the overall thought of in all of this in these areas. But the problems we've had with the couple of incidences of Uber. I mean, are those isolated incidences? Are they a bigger percentage based upon all the driverless cars that are out there? Or are those the inevitable hiccups you're going to have to, I guess, go through until the technology is truly perfected?
I'm thinking it's in the early stages of development, and not every algorithm or every incident has been thought through. I mean, and then you're working with machines that can break down, so you want to make sure that you've got some backup systems and things that work. So I think you're still a ways away. We don't have those systems yet, but there's a rapid attempt to get there.
So in essence, what we're looking at this point, so we're again going back to what we talked about. We're bringing that divide between narrow and general. General is again what we expect it to be, full, intelligent machine learning rather than a functional tool. I guess that's the best way to say it.
It is. So I mean, we're at the beginning stages, so there's a lot of work to be done. But we're actually seeing some amazing results in terms of seeing through data, building kinds of things.
What they're also talking about here, and how AI can help solve some of the biggest challenges in procurement. Procurement Con article talked about identifying new markets, tracking exchange rate volatility, managing risk, and identifying best suppliers. So they're looking to utilize AI to really leverage big data to streamline processes and improve decision making. And big data has been taught for a while as well. Let me do this, and looking at that, one of the biggest, I guess I won't say issues with big data, but perhaps it is that being able to sort through or sift through all of that data to find what's meaningful and what isn't. I mean, you can get lost in the forest of information. I mean, is that part of where, is that something that has to be achieved, the cleansing of the pond, as one expert put it, before it can be utilized in artificial intelligence, or is that artificial intelligence part of the cleansing process?
It was part of the cleansing process. So we're seeing it when you go on to Amazon, you look at one thing, and then that company's sending you it's within minutes of you going on. And if you have programs like Alexa or others, they're listening all the time, and they're picking up this data, and this data is massive amount of data, and things are being captured from all that data that's being collected.
Okay, so if you look at that, because I know this, and again, I go onto an Amazon, for example, and it remembers what I looked at in the way of product, and then it automatically at my system will put just those specific ads, and it'll be carried throughout. Now, I mean, and I never thought of that in terms of a practical sense being artificial intelligence, but in a way, that's what you're talking about. It's able to anticipate what my future needs might be based upon my past needs. That's really how you're describing it.
It'll send you, if you're buying something that has components, it'll keep sending you emails on what kind of components you can get to make your device even better. So it'll give you all of the competitors on the device, and you can ask for that. It's just showing up in your social media accounts.
Okay, this is an interesting question here. Are we ever going to get to the stage where that kind of information flow based upon usage is going to proactively trigger a buy? Let me frame the question for you in this manner, Bill. We get on a buyer side, you receive a request to acquire a product or service, and you go out to the market, and the market goes into a react mode and responds to that. And of course, there's filtering systems, there's algorithm systems, there's all kinds of things so that you can select the best supplier that provides the best service, the best delivery at the best price. But it's very much a supplier reactive mode. Are we moving with artificial intelligence to a supplier proactive mode, almost like tracking the stock market? Let's say if you're used to buying MRO parts and it's every 3 months you do it and there's a price fluctuation and change, that you as buyers will actually be prompted saying, this is now what's happening in the marketplace, move on it now rather than later. I mean, are we getting to that stage?
I think you're getting to that stage, and I think it can be almost instantaneous because, think about the price bot, think about the dynamic pricing. Well, it was really interesting because I had a trip to Toronto and I landed, it was a delayed trip, and I landed somewhere around 1 o'clock in the morning. When I got the cab line, it was somewhere around 3 hours long. When I went to use another like Lyft or Uber, they had dynamic pricing. They had the price put up at $250 or $220 for a 15-minute ride, because dynamically their system knew that there was a backup at that airport, and my choice was wait till 4 in the morning when I had to speak at 8, or take a 15-minute ride at $200. So you're seeing that now. You're seeing dynamic pricing happen, and you're also seeing companies that are putting these bots to check the pricing and really it's very competitive. I worry about the future of the bots.
Okay, well, this is an interesting point. Maybe expand on that a little, because I think dynamic interaction where eventually what's going to happen is that you can have a proactive engagement from both sides of the equation. Okay, let's look at the bots that you're talking about. We send out bots there into the general world and the general marketplace, and in essence, it's doing the perpetual work for us, always keeping us informed, always doing this. Is it at the point now where we become systems monitors? I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it comes down to, I can envision where a acquisition would go into your artificial intelligence. It would search all the suppliers on the internet. It would get prices and capabilities and lead times and come out and say, here are the 3 sources for this, and it would happen almost instantaneous.
This is an interesting point then, because this is where it changes the dynamics, and perhaps this goes to the second pole, Bill. If we look at artificial intelligence, if we look at its impact on the procurement function, and again, I was surprised by the small amount of people saying it's going to hit my job or it's going to reduce workforce in there. Anybody out there who would like to comment on that, who did put that in, please let us know why you did. But I was surprised by the minimal number of people who said it's going to affect workforce. It replace jobs, but it change jobs. I mean, that's the bigger thing here, isn't it? I mean,
Absolutely.
We're not going to have the, how do I say, let's use a simple analogy, which may be digressing off course a little bit here, but, my uncle could tell, my old great uncle could tell the weather was going to change and it's going to rain because his knee would start to ache, and we could rely on my great uncle to tell us when it's going to rain. Of course, weather systems get advanced, and now we know. So are we moving the realm of procurement instinct and professionalism of interacting? Are we moving it out of their hands and putting it into the hands of the technology? I mean, and that's what I'm really thinking about. I mean, is that the concern with the bots you're talking about?
It is. I mean, actually, I did some work in a chemical company about 8 months ago, and when it came time to look at the indirects, they sent me 15,000 suppliers to look at. Right, when I did my Pareto, I hit 90% at 400 suppliers. And my conversation with that CEO is, look, you've got 14,600 suppliers that have less than, you can't even see some of that spend on the radar. So I mean, the stuff is going to all be handled. I see it all be handled automatically. And really, where I want my team working on is the important 400 suppliers, and work on how can I get more consolidation, more leverage in the supply base, quicker responses, quicker lead times. I want my team doing that. If I have a lot of low-value spend and it's there's a lot of suppliers, it's highly leveraged, and a lot of suppliers, low-value spend, I can spend all my time on that, and I'll get no value for it. So I really want to put people on matching value and getting more value.
This is an interesting point, because this goes back to what we were talking about earlier on, is that the whole idea of the Internet of Things and Internet of Things human, and that ties into the AI question and their conversation, is that the idea is to free up people, humans, to become more strategic, correct?
Absolutely.
This is an interesting question here. Tim Cummins from IACCM, and Tim, Bill.
Yes, I know Tim.
He talked about the fact that at a panel discussion a couple of years ago, saying is that 40 to 50% of all procurement people will become obsolete within the next 5 years. I don't know what you think about that number, first of all, but is it really a question of obsolescence, or is it, again, just a question of adjusting and getting or acquiring these necessary skills? And when we acquire these skills, are there as many roles to play in that regard?
Well, unfortunately, I think Tim is totally correct, because if we take away transactions, there are some people that have lived their whole life fighting the fire and live the day where they can go out and get the supplier to do something and set a day, but really strategic. It's really tactical, transactional, and people love that. If that goes away, there really isn't a place in procurement for someone that's highly tactical and transactional. I think the one thing that may be a surprise to people is, I think over the next 5 to 8 years, price isn't going to be as important as value. So, I'm working with customers right now where speed to market is the thing. If I can be first in the market, I capture the market. If you think about Apple and the iPhone, if they weren't first in the market, wouldn't have the position they have today. So you think about how important it is. I work in the home building industry, and they would love to save money on a per house basis, but they can't find the labor to build houses. So if they've got capital invested and they've got all this land that they paid for, and they can't find anybody to finish the houses, then they don't have a good return on capital. So their drive is really not, it is to save money, but it's also to make sure that they can meet the business plan and close out as many houses as they can to get a return on their capital. So the industry's changing, and value is becoming more and more important. And I give you probably a couple more examples about what should be our priorities, where should be working. But I think long term, we're not going to be focused on price reduction. In fact, in the last couple clients that I've been with, I've told them, don't use that word anymore. Use cost and value improvement.
Well, now, and you know what? Time's flying by pretty quick. Getting to the next phase, because what we want to do is cover at the high level, going back. Yep. What is AI? And in the narrow versus general, I think creates that bandwidth of understanding, and then going into what impact will it have. This is an important conversation, because it's changing more so, I think, just to close off this last section here, Bill, it's going to have more of an impact on changing the way in which procurement professionals work than any other technological breakthrough before.
Absolutely.
Is that a fair statement?
A very fair statement. The future of our work is totally different, and I think the priorities of business are going to be totally different as we move into the future.
Well, now let's look at how do you capitalize, and we're going to start off with our third and final poll, and we're going to cue our pollster. There are specific things that procurement professionals can do to prepare for AI. True, false, or uncertain. Now, I'll cue the Jeopardy music with that. But Bill, is this a deer in the headlights scenario for a lot of procurement professionals, that it's going to come and and it's inevitable? Is there things that procurement, I think, what you talked about previously, sort of leads into this discussion? Are there things that they can do to prepare AI if they have a firm understanding of what it is too? Because I think that could be part of the problem, right?
Well, you've got that, and you've got how do you incorporate it into your current IT technology, and I think many of the IT people are not prepared for. They're still on a major focus on privacy and security. So we're not prepared. Then we haven't seen the systems yet that are easy to drop in and use, except for, I think you're going to see the the personal assistant and things like that coming together, language translators and things like that are AI that can cross back and forth. I think those things we can prepare for. But I think we need to keep abreast of it. We need to understand how it's going to work, where applications now, and we need someone to come forward and use the technology, which we don't have right at the moment.
So there's still a lot of roads that have to lead to that intersection of actual utilization, right?
I'm thinking yes.
Okay, let's look at the response, because the poll response are kind of interesting. There are specific things that procurement professionals can do. 50% said, yes, it's true, we can do it, but 50% said they're uncertain. What does it tell you?
That tells me that we have a mixed view on what's happening with AI at the moment. But I do believe they're to be ready for it. It's going to be here, so we might as well find what technology we can use and figure out where can we use that technology. That's what I think you can do to prepare for it.
Now, you're going to be talking about this a little bit more, too, and as I get to the upcoming slides. But in preparing people for it, is it something that is up to the procurement professional themselves, or how much of an influence, responsibility does the senior leadership within an organization have?
Well, they have a lot to understand what's available at the moment, what's capable, how much does it cost, and should I budget for it? And how do I use it? But when you look at the cross section of businesses, there's a very elite group of businesses that can afford new technology and have the technology people that can implement that technology. Then there's still a broad base of middle level companies that haven't even figured out how to get their categories aligned or their P2P systems together. And then there's a final group that's way behind the curve. So it'll be adopted in the companies that, one, can afford it, and two, have the initiative to drive it. So you have to think about that, because I went to a supply chain. I did a supply chain transformation in a company about 2 years ago, and they were still running off of a system where we had 5 or 6 people going together. The people most successful in that company were people that could use KL and write their own reports.
Well, this is an interesting point going into this time, because what you're talking about there, in this article, The Future of Procurement with AI, in Singapore Institute of Purchasing and Materials Management, they talked about 3 things: executive commitment, and we talked about that earlier too, Bill, where the McKinsey study, where they said, out of the 1,620 incumbent companies, and these are companies that are well established globally, only 20% of senior leadership have a definitive or defined digital transformation strategy, or right, what has been called digital reinvention, and only 2% of those have a supply chain. So if we look at those numbers, I think 2% of those are 2% of the overall, but still a minuscule number by comparison. I mean, if we look at that, how can procurement professionals be prepared if the executive commitment isn't there, or they don't have the scope? And because if you don't have executive commitment, I don't think you can do the other two. I don't think you can manage expectations, because there are none, and you're certainly not choosing the right partner. So I mean, it all starts, the focal point here is the executive commitment, isn't it?
And in some cases, I was at a company not too ago where they had 26 different systems, which were integrated. So there are a series of acquisitions. They've got 26 different systems, no integration, and by the time they put an ERP in, it's probably going to take them 4 to 5 years. Their enterprise, and so we've got people that are at the leading edge and have everything together, and they can look at they have the data, they have to spend analytics, and then we have the other end of the spectrum where people have 26 systems and they don't even know what they buy.
Okay, so to ask this question then, again, because emphasizing executive commitment is right from the top. Ultimately, our procurement professionals, if their executives are slow to the game, are those professionals within those organizations, are they at a disadvantage?
They are, and as other people start adopting the new technology and AI as a way forward, they could be left in competitive disadvantage, and could be one of the companies that get gobbled up in the mergers and consolidation that we've been seeing over a number of years.
So again, and so that's the first hurdle. So if only 20% of executives are digitally ready, let's call it that, which encompasses AI, really, there's nothing that procurement can do, is there, in their own organizations or within these organizations a professional can do to really facilitate AI. Let me ask you this, because of your role with SIPs, and of course talking with you and Phil earlier a couple of months ago, what that do for associations in terms of preparing for professionals for the AI? Because it is inevitable, it is going to happen, right?
Right. It is, and I think it's our responsibility to come out with, what are the best practices, where do they go, who's using what, and really doing the research and really putting out the information so people know exactly what to do and how to do it and who's doing it and where you should be benchmarking. Because if you have that, then I think you leave companies and people behind, and we never want to do that. We want to make sure that everybody's aware, and everybody in their own position has to realize, are we going to be in that position? Am I going to be in that position? And if you're transactional, it's time to really get strategic. So it's our job to make sure that we give the people the tools and the capability to move themselves into a more strategic position.
So ultimately, what that when organizations, when management gets to that stage, when you're setting the expectations, if procurement professionals already have the understanding of AI and what its possibilities are, we talked about bots, we talked about the processes of automations, all of these things. I mean, if you're ahead of that curve as a procurement pro, that's going to put you in a driver's seat within your own enterprise, isn't it?
If you even think of AI, spend analytics with 26 systems, you're going to have some and I know that Zycus is excellent at spend analytics as well as others, but now they're using AI to help sort through that spend really quickly and identify it, whereas before they would use people.
Right. So this is kind of an interesting turn. I mean, if we were to look at the AI revolution, it could be safe to say that this could be door opening for that coveted seat at the table. We've always heard that, right, Bill? I mean, procurement pros want the seat at the table, but if we get ahead of AI, without having our expectation managed, we're actually creating the expectation within our organizations as to what it can do. In essence, we can become the champions of AI, correct?
We can, and we should. We should be on top of it. We should be benchmarking. We should be looking at how people are using it. We should understand when we're chatting, if we're chatting with a bot or chatting with a person. Those are interesting things to understand.
Now, the dynamics and the third part that the Institute had talked about, and this is again just this February came. So we're dealing with current information, which I like. Is they're talking about the mix of technology and outsourcing services. So if you were describing, I know if Joe had been able to sign in with us with a technical difficulty, if he'd been able to sign in with us because of his experience with Bank of America, would have something to add. But from your standpoint, the reality is we have to look at how we line ourselves in terms of bringing the right partners to make this work correctly, right? There's certain things that we're going to rely on technology. There's certain things we're going to rely on internal capability, but we're also going to outsource services on that. So the dynamics of let's call it the integration of capability, that's really a key part of AI, isn't it?
It is, and from a sourcing standpoint, when we think about automation, and I think about automation not only in the system side, but in the manufacturing side. When you automate processes and you automate manufacturing, then you actually eliminate the need for low-cost country sourcing, because machines don't get tired. They work all the time, and they don't keep asking for wage increases. Go ahead.
Net result in all this is there is a focus. When you think about AI, there is a focus on technology, and it certainly plays a major role into it. But it's not at the stage where we're at a Skynet. Let's go back to that reference in the earlier part between narrow AI and general AI. We're not at a point where we can be completely removed from the equation, is it?
No, we're not. But we should be supporting it, and especially if we have suppliers that are automating and they're automating their process. That's gonna take your costs down, and then we're gonna have to automate the procurement process and get more strategic, because we want to find those suppliers and help those suppliers invest in technology to keep on driving costs You can't you continue to get cost and value improvement with doing something by changing specifications or by changing processes or by automating. That's how you keep on going with your cost and value improvement. And we're going to continue to want more value year on year, and we're going to continue to drive more value. So I think that's going to be a key piece.
Well, this ties into again the conclusion overall, and I like this, is that to unlock the greatest savings of AI, we have to tackle the problem of data silos and legacy IT infrastructure. Now, I mean, I have my opinion relative to this, but what's your thoughts about that?
You're absolutely right. I mean, how can you go to AI when you, using my example of the company that has 26 different systems, they can't even find their spend. And it's a big company, the one with 15,000 MRO items, MRO suppliers, or I've seen as many as 70,000 suppliers. And you really can't, you're really not doing yourself justice. I went into one company that had, I want to say almost 600,000 different specs with all the mergers they had, and they had no way of homogenizing those specs, whereas we had the automation capability to look at that and just run a scan on the system. You'd be able to do that very, very quickly. Or even intelligence that tells you eliminate these SKUs because you're not using them, you're not selling them. Those are really critical. So you think of that's all going to be critical. In the planning piece, it's going to be critical to measure inventory, look at our slow-moving inventory, and make recommendations on SKUs. It's also going to be critical to be able to sort through suppliers, find the best suppliers, be able to do some cost analysis and market analysis in terms of where are the suppliers, what's capability, what's the capacity in the industry, what's the pricing in the industry, what's the cost in the industry. That kind of supplier intelligence is really going to drive more value because you'll pick the suppliers and you'll align with people that are really driving more value into your business. So I think that's going to be critical, but you can't do it without fixing your infrastructure. And there are a lot of companies out there that have a way to go. And will they survive?
Well, this is an interesting point. And the survival question, I want to touch on that momentarily because we're running up to the end of our hour. And, great conversation. Time flies. When you look at this, it's the procurement. We're talking about this from the procurement side of the equation, but IT is going to go through a major transformation with this as well, aren't they?
They're gonna. I mean, self-monitoring systems, monitoring batteries, monitoring plant locations, monitoring equipment. That's all going to be AI.
So that require, for lack of a better word, does that provide opportunities again to remove some of those functional silos? I know they talk about the in the previous or this one data silos and legacy IT infrastructure, but does that extend into the functional silos that have partitioned, I guess, procurement and IT and finance? I mean, are we going to find a more holistic enterprise where there's going to be an overlap of capabilities, whereas, for example, IT people are going to have much better understanding of the procurement function and the supply chain. Procurement professionals are going to have to have a much better understanding of IT. And one of the things I'm thinking of in this bill, in this last minute here, is that our utilization of technology, let's say in the home, with handhelds, with all these things, I mean, in the up-and-coming millennial generation, I mean, there's a higher degree of comfort with technology now than, let's say, 20 years ago. I mean, these are going to be factors in blurring those lines a little bit, aren't they?
They are, and then to make things even more complex is you've got people in space that they never entered before. So you've got, Amazon entering the MRO business. That's critical. If you've got a warehouse like we have in Phoenix, they can deliver in an hour. It doesn't matter if they have the components, they'll deliver it in an hour. So that's changing the MRO. It's actually disrupting the MRO business, and there's lots of disruptions across they're disrupting the grocery chain business. They're disrupting all these businesses, and so it's really reacting to disruptive innovation. People are disrupting all, and so hopefully you can align your business to manage with the disruption. And actually, some of the disruptors are going to be the surviving suppliers. Well,
as we close, let's do a poll of one. I'll do just you. Okay, Bill?
Sure.
Is AI good procurement? Yes or no?
Right. I think it will be very good for procurement because we've got information that you would not have gotten anyway. It would have taken you hours, weeks, months, years to collect some of the data that you'll be able to get at your fingertips, which will enable procurement folks to make decisions. I also think it will also align the supply chain and force integration of the supply chain, where our job will become managing supplier relations across the chain, because a lot of other stuff will be automated, and over time, I think we're going to see value be the contributor, and I think even profits will be distributed by the value that a particular link in the chain provides to the end customer. So I think it's going to change everything that we do, but I think it's going to give us better information so that we understand exactly how markets are working, exactly how currencies are working. We can make good decisions, which right now, when we have companies that have multiple systems and we have lack of integration and we've had lack of upgrades, we can't make those decisions as good. We have to do a lot of manual labor, and when you do manual labor, sometimes you miss things. Well,
Michael, thank you for joining us today. Again, sorry Joe couldn't hook up, but technology, I guess, it's just another example of, we still have a ways to go. Nothing is perfect, right?
I guess, yeah, I miss Joe. Joe's a good, great guy, and if anybody needs to talk about AI, reach out to Joe, because he's certainly on top of technology.
Perfect. And we want to remind everyone before we sign off, the chat hashtag is AIPro2018. I'll be posting the poll results shortly and inviting you to comment. And, we'll be posting some of the highlights in terms of what this discussion is. And I thought it was a very, very insightful 60 minutes that just flew by very quickly. Just one final note, again, to remind you, Ziko Horizon 2018 is coming up on October 28th to 30. Again, it's a great conference where procurement intellect meets digital technology. Use promo code WebNAR100 to receive a $100 discount off your registration fee. And just want to, again, thank you all for attending. And I would like to suggest that, again, avail yourself of the on-demand version. We're going to be posting that as well. Share it far and wide, and let's keep this discussion going. So, thank you, Bill,
thanks, John.
and thank you, everyone.